The EFF says it wants to make education fashionable. And of course, we know this past week or 2 weekends ago, they also went to the H&M's retail stores and trashed them. We'll talk about those 2 points with Dr. Mbuyiseni Ndlozi, who's with me here in the studio. I want to start first with making education fashionable. Despite the fights that you've had with the president in parliament and the walkouts or being forced out, kicked out, and the criticisms leveled at him, it was interesting that you seized the opportunity when he announced that the government is going to provide free tertiary education. And within days or a week, you pounced on that chance, and you seem to be in the same camp, now saying free tertiary education should be made available to all the poor students. So is that one policy area where you agree with President Zuma?
Yeah, absolutely. And it has nothing to do with him. It's a long call from the 1950s, which is enshrined in the Freedom Charter. It has been a call of the 1970s student movement. It has been a call of the 1980s student movement. It's been a call of the EFF from, it's one of our founding 7 cardinal pillars, which are non-negotiable, that education must have to do with how smart you are, not how much money you have. And therefore, we couldn't distance ourselves, we couldn't reject it. We had to welcome it and make sure that it is implemented.
Well, the point about it is that it is seen as opportunistic on your part to call on people to do walk-ins at these tertiary institutions without checking whether they are ready to take in any additional number of students, because they can only, each of the institutions can take a specific number of students. So if they turn up, let's say for 1,000 places you have 12,000 students pitching up, who's going to reject the other 11,000?
No. That argument suffers from not understanding how universities are run. The call is for applications, not for universities to be forced to take everyone. Those are 2 stages. If you announce on the 16th of December that there will be free education beginning in 2018, you are conscious that applications have closed. So if I knew that I don't have money because I couldn't get in 2015, in 2014, because I didn't have money, that call affects me. So my application is not inside the box of those that will be considered for whatever number of spaces.
Yes.
And therefore, what we were calling for is a reopening of applications so that the people who don't have money, who did not apply because they didn't know, will be given an opportunity to also put in their application so that they can be considered.
So leveling the playing fields as
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Otherwise, the universities would still be about those who can pay in 2018, and therefore the education, free education call would have not affected those that really matter, which are the poor. So, and that's the misinterpretation that even managers of universities opportunistically try to confuse society on. Because we never said that they must take all the students. We said, no, reopen applications so that those who want to take advantage of free education are considered as well. So if you've got 11,000 spaces, you would have given all of them to students that can pay. Now you need to reconsider, not on the basis of who can pay, on the basis of academic performance.
Okay, well, that's an ongoing story anyway, because you're making education fashionable, as you say.
Absolutely, Bratim, and if you want to blame us, this is important. If you want to blame us for leading scores of hundreds of thousands of students to queue at universities, to knock at an education door for them to advance their education, we take the blame. At least we don't only lead young people on the streets to march against H&M, to march for free economic freedom against the banks and so on and so forth. We also led them to education. We said to them, go and seek education. Other people lead them to festivals where they drink, where they do drugs and alcohols. Others only want them to queue at the voting stations. They think the youth is only important for queuing at voting stations. So universities have the responsibility to put mechanisms in place to consider all those applications.
And of course to awaken in the youth the fact that the opportunity to learn at a higher level is there now, is available in South Africa.
And by the way, Bratin, it's no longer a debate all the universities came around
Yes.
to agree with us
Okay.
and reopened applications. All of them did that. They reopened applications.
Let's talk about
their point of
a
departure
controversial
had been wrong.
matter now that the EFF was involved in, the
Yes.
raid of the H&M store.
Raid.
The raid of the H&M.
That's very unfortunate because the term should be protest.
Yeah, well, it's protest, but
You see, if you say raid,
yeah.
it's as if we took something from H&M.
No,
We
no,
didn't.
no. What I mean is, when you went into the H&M
No,
store,
if the Hawks raid this place, they taking stuff. They taking you. They're taking things in the house as evidence
okay,
for whatever.
maybe it's
That's
an
what raid means.
maybe it's an unfortunate word, but okay, you went into the H&M stores anyway, and it was seemingly a very well coordinated effort on the part of the EFF members, right? And the fact that the marketing campaign of H&M is offensive is accepted broadly, internationally, widely so. But that EFF chose to go into those stores and stop the operations, and in some instances to trash the stores, is something that has been regarded by some commentators as a misguided operation on the part of the EFF that is going to backfire horribly for yourselves.
That's been our life, Bratin. Everything we have done. When people don't understand what you are doing, they go for your person. And that is misguided on their part. Is that when they don't agree with you, they start wishing you will lose support, you are a savage, blah, because they don't agree with you. It's misguided on their part because everything we've been doing has been met with the same comment. So we don't mind, because that's been our life anyway, to break new ground. Until we did that, people had accepted an apology from H&M. How is it different from any other instance in which when white monopoly capital, particularly multinational corporations, are caught with their pens down on anti-black racism, they apologize and life goes on. There are no consequences to the affliction of the dignity of black people. And therefore, we reopened the debate because we're rejecting an apology. There must be consequences. And that campaign will go on until H&M comes on the table and says, what do we pay for the damage that we have done? How do we pay? What are the consequences? What are the remedial action for engaging on our part in anti-black racism? And when they come on the table, we're going to tell them, this is what you do, and you dare again engage in anti-black racism.
Now, racism overall manifests itself in various ways, as we know, and we've got a long history in South Africa of that. In the workplace, the pay disparities on the basis of race, the abuse of workers, a whole number of things. Just in broad terms, and it's a subject on its own, it requires longer time to probe. How do you think South Africa, at least the world, but in the context of South Africa, how should racism be dealt with?
You see, there are two levels, but what I'm concerned about, what we are concerned about, is anti-black racism. Now, there are two levels. There's the level of the interpersonal racism. You are in a queue, and then white people call you a kefir. Whatever you are going to do in response, and even if it's violent, we will defend your right. Because that's what racism is in our definition. It is violence. But then there's the structural violence, structural racism, which has often been normalized, and it seems difficult over the years to confront. And here is an important analogy. Your neighbor's hatred of you may not be important until it blocks you from access to a school, until it blocks you from access to a training ground, to a park, to all sorts of privileges. Then you have to start fighting. So what do we need to eliminate? We may not be able to teach white people not to hate us. As a matter of fact, we're not interested in that. What we're interested in is their hatred should not matter in relation to black people's access to happiness and all kinds of livelihood. And how do we do it? Is to bring black people closer to the means of production, closer to controlling their lives. And the land occupation struggles, the call for land expropriation is precisely to resolve structural racism. The call for free education is to resolve structural racism, because if we don't do that, education, and particularly its highest form, will always be accessed by people who have money, and those people at the time or at the moment remain largely white people. The call for the nationalization of banks is to make sure that the control of who gets credit how and when is not determined by the monopolies that are doing it in the interest of sustaining white privilege, but it begins to go to black people. Who gets a credit for an entrepreneurial activity? Who gets a credit for this and that particular pursuit? All those calls are to address colonialism, which is structured racism. And in the end, nobody will be able, on the basis of the color of your skin, determine what you will get access to, and will not be able to determine as well your place in the world.
Mbuyiseni Ndlozi, pleasure to have you with us on the
Brati.
program. Much appreciated.
I
And as I've
appreciate
said, it's going to be a bigger debate. I hope we will have it, where we focus on all the points we've made regarding the fight against racism in the South African context. And that's how we come to the end of the show tonight with Mbuyiseni Ndlozi, who speaks on behalf of the EFF. And we hope you enjoyed our discussion and learned something from it. Until next time, good night to you.